Welcome to the Healer's Café, conversations on health and healing with Dr. Manon.
So welcome to the Healer's Café, and today I have with me Dr. Ivano Ongaro, and he is a dentist for the last 40 years who has discovered or has known all along that he has a strong artist inside him. And so I was really excited to have this interview because, you know, in medicine, there is lots of art, and in everything we do, there's art. So I just, I really wanted to hear from you. So first of all, go ahead and give everyone a little bit more your training, who you are, what you've done. Feel free to share. And okay. Thank you for being here.
All right. My training is sort of starting at the beginning of my dental career was at the University of Alberta, and I graduated in 1978. I went to a small town called Whitecourt, Alberta, and that's where I spent the next 35 years practice. Now, somewhere in the middle there, I did a master's degree in craniofacial development part-time, and that led to teaching opportunities at the University of Alberta, I think starting in 2000. And I taught part-time at the university for a number of years. And then in 2012, I joined the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry as a full-time clinical instructor. So my title was Assistant Clinical Professor. So I spent the last 7 years teaching there. And then I decided that in 2018 to retire. So my interest in art goes back, I guess, quite a long ways. I was born in Italy as a child, and our family was very poor there, and we became immigrants to Canada. But before we came to Canada, we had to go to Rome for all the tests and traits that were healthy. And while we were in Rome, we went to the Basilica, and that was the first time I saw the Pietà. So that must have struck a chord with me, because from that on, I remember being interested in art.
Interesting. So yeah. Before we go into the art, what actually led you to dentistry? Like, why dentistry? And
why dentistry? Okay, so I have a story for that. And sometimes I get emotional telling it. When I was about 10 years old, I had a little upper molar, a cavity.
I'm gonna get you to repeat because the sound went bad.
I had a small hole or a cavity in my upper left first molar, and I could feel it with my tongue. And in Edmonton in those days, almost every house on almost a kilometer-long walk to school, there were houses with raspberry trees, raspberry bushes growing, and you would eat raspberries on your way to school. And one day, one of these raspberry seeds got stuck in my tooth, and it was very annoying. It wasn't hurting, but it was very, very annoying. So in the middle of the day, I finally decided I was going to do something about this hole in my tooth with a seed stuck in it. And I rummaged around inside my desk, and I found a paper clip. So I unwound the paper clip, started digging around trying to pry this. And of course, all of a sudden it jammed into my tooth, and holy smokes, was that ever painful, right? So needless to say, the pain didn't go away. So the next day, my parents took me to the dentist, and the dentist's name was Dr. Wally Meyer. I'll never forget him because he ended up being a professor of mine later on. And so here, in this amazing pain, I couldn't sleep all night. And of course, when I got there, there was all this stuff with the pulleys and all of these things in those old days. And of course, he numbed me up, and the pain went away. It was like instantaneous, like, wow, that was amazing. And of course, he fixed my tooth. And I remember at that time thinking, wow, this is something that I could do. Now, the sort of the backstory on that is that I wasn't a very good student at the time. And it really didn't click for me to things didn't change for me academically, because I'm an academically weak student, till I reached about grade 8 and I was sent to another school. And when that happened, I had a teacher there whose name was Mrs. Kennedy, and she was an amazing teacher, and she changed the way I thought about things. And I went from being a barely passing student to not quite honors. And that was really exciting. So that philosophical change held. So I got into high school. I was able to go into the academic stream. And of course, then my high school teacher convinced me that I should consider dentistry, because dentistry was never, although I had that idea when I was, 10 years old, I'd never thought I could accomplish that. So my high school teacher was the one who convinced me that I had the intellect to be able to potentially become. Right. And so of course that led to the struggle in university to get the grades that I needed to get into dentistry.
So what was the philosophical change? Like what was the difference?
It's hard to say. I think they're just sort of rediscovering that idea. It's perhaps I didn't know how to apply myself. I know that I did not know how to study. Neither of my parents had any, like my father had only grade 5 education. My mother, not at all. So they weren't able to help me.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I've always been interested and curious in the sciences. I loved science. I think I had, since I was about 12 or 13 years old, I've always had a microscope, right? So I love looking at things under the microscope, and I loved science. But it wasn't until grade 8 where there was the academic shift. And I think it was probably confidence building. I know my handwriting was notorious, and it was Mrs. Kennedy who insisted that I improve my handwriting. But I was originally left-handed, and I was forced to work right-handed. So cursive writing never worked for me.
Right, yeah.
And so she had me go back to printing.
Okay.
And that made a big difference, because now I could actually read what I wrote.
Yeah, it does help.
Yeah.
Wow, that's quite a moving story.
It's quite a story to how I get into dentistry, and of course, the whole story of the competitiveness of getting into dentistry is quite like there. The University of Alberta, when I was applying, and there was roughly 500 people that were, or even more than 500 that were applying to get into dentistry at any one time. And I wasn't successful in my first application. I was on the alternate list, and I was on the alternate list. I applied the second year, so the second time, which is now my third year of university. And again, I was on the alternate list, and I got a phone call from the administrator, I think about 2 days before classes were starting. I think it was the Friday or the Thursday, and the classes were starting on the following Tuesday, just basically long weekend in September. And they said, well, if you've just been accepted into dentistry, you've got till 6 o'clock tonight to get us your deposit, or go to the next person. So yeah, I got into dentistry as 50th out of 50 in the class. So,
wow.
That was, yeah. So yeah, so and then of course there's the whole another story about the dental career part.
But
Yeah.
it's, I mean, it's interesting though how, confidence, right, is such a big thing, and if you
Oh,
don't, if you're not supported in having
absolutely.
confidence,
Yeah.
it affects your future,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. My parents were always, do your best, but
Right.
how do you know what your best is when you don't
When
know?
you don't know. Yeah.
And and I think it's where these key teachers in my life that that made the difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's anyway, I'm sure you're not the only one who has had that impact from, a
Oh,
really,
absolutely.
really good
Absolutely.
teacher,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there are a lot of bad ones out there, but the good ones are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Yeah.
need those good ones. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So then, so really, you wanted to become a dentist because you had a personal experience.
Exactly.
It took you out of pain, and you related to it. And then, so then what happens? Because what happens? So you go through university, you become a dentist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then what?
Yeah. Then what?
Then what? Yeah. Well, to become a dentist. Well, I have to say that the story that I told you was the same story that I told when on the interview process. I was asked why I wanted to become a dentist, and I know when my daughter went to chiropractic college, for the interviews, my sister had been trained in interviews, and there's this whole preparation process for interviewing when you do these entrance things, right? I had no idea, so I went in cold into the interview, and I just spoke what I felt.
Yeah.
So after graduation, there's a little backstory here. I met my wife when we were in the program, and I graduated dentistry. We had engaged a year before I finished school.
Ivano, can you repeat that piece? It also, I don't know what's happening with my internet, so just repeat at that point.
Okay. So my wife and I met in university. We were competitors in getting into the dental program, and we became engaged a year before I graduated. And when I graduated, we then got married, and we moved to Whitecourt, and that's where we started my practice, along with a classmate of mine, whom also was instrumental in helping me succeed, because he had gone to a private school and he had learned certain systematic methods of studying, which I had no idea of. And with his help, I was able to succeed to a far greater degree than I would have on my own, simply because he taught me the systematic way of learning. I've always been somewhat dyslexic, and I didn't I didn't discover that until I was in university, where I just could not keep up. So during the course of university, I developed a system where I could stay focused long enough in studying, which I didn't realize I had that issue. I was undiagnosed in that regard. So my system was to arrange my study space in sort of a circle, basically, and I would have all of my subjects, because in dentistry, I think there's something like 8 or 9 subjects that we're studying at any one time. And when you can't stay focused on anything for more than maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and there's these reams and reams of material, it's impossible to get anywhere. But I discovered that if I arranged my studies in a circle, basically, and then I would just simply keep all of my study books arranged as they were. It looks like a disaster zone. there's another story about that. Anyway, I would, the way my mind works, if I'm studying on a particular subject, then there's a question that pops up about some other subject. Well, this question won't leave me out until you deal with it. So I would go to that particular subject and I would study that solution to that question. And then at some later time, a few minutes later, there'd be another question about another subject. So I'd be beep-bobbing between all of these study centers. And then eventually the material would get covered, but not only covered, but it gets integrated.
Yeah.
And that's something that I found very useful. So within my university years, I was never the highest mark sort of on any subject, but it turned out that I was almost the highest overall.
Interesting.
Right? So that was interesting in that, so I ended up graduating second or third in the class out of 50. And again, I attribute this to my colleague who taught me to study, but part of it was that I managed to figure out how to deal with all those subjects and be able to maintain focus over long periods of time while being distracted. Right. So my wife and I moved to Whitecourt, and we rented for a while, then bought a home, and pretty soon, a year later, there was children and our first daughter, and then a year and a half later, we had a son, and a year and a half after that, we had another son. So we have 3 children. And all of this while, after I got to university, after we graduated, I started getting involved in the local art society. There was a potter's guild, and they had weekly sessions. So from time to time, I would do little things. We would travel museums, and I would learn through that, books. As I mentioned earlier before the interview, Robert Bateman I was inspired by Robert Bateman and his story. He was a teacher originally, and then he became an artist. And I was inspired by that. So I followed sort of somewhat in that regard. But it wasn't until the year 2000 that I finally took an actual course in sculpture through just some night classes through Grant McEwen. And I did my first portrait bust, and I was hooked. Yeah. So I was I was about 50 when I did that. So
amazing. Wow. And so a bust, so also looking at the features of the
exactly. Yeah. So the research, I had done a master's, as I mentioned earlier, I think it was a part-time degree in craniofacial development, how the face forms. And that was done it took me, I think, 6 years to finish it part-time. But that really deepened my understanding of human anatomy. And certainly the practice, because I did some orthopedics, which is a form of growth modification in children, as part of my practice, and that gave me a real profound understanding of how, the internal elements of the skull affect the outer elements. So,
could you share a little bit on that?
Well, I've actually designed from this concept how what we see on the outside is because of our skeletal elements. For example, typically most of the Negro features are somewhat round-faced. When we look at the Oriental people, their face is somewhat flatter. And you take some, particularly, I think there's a Spanish group where they have these particularly large jaws, right? So the way the elements of the bone, where the maxilla, the mid part of the face, and the length of the jaw, and where the face sits underneath the skull, whether it's more forward or further back, all of these, basically these three elements, the skull, the maxilla, or the upper part of the jaw, and the bottom part of the jaw, the mandible, the relative sizes of these and their position gives everybody their different profiles. So I've actually developed a lecture for artists that illustrates that using actual pictures and skeletons and stuff. So
because that's an area that interests me a lot as well, but not from the artistic point of view, that I haven't discovered yet, but noticing, you know, after dental treatment, more so orthodontics,
yes,
that it will impact the way the face is, you know, because as they try and straighten the teeth, there's no or there was no understanding of the jaw.
Yeah.
And part of the work I do with soft tissue is realign the jaw, and it changes everything. And so, what do you know of this, or what can you share?
Well, I spent a lot of time doing orthodontics and orthopedics, particularly for children. So the important thing in my mind is that you can modify the growth. Some people refer to it as the functional matrix. Before I got into dentistry, I actually spent one of those extra years in university studying comparative vertebrate zoology and also embryology. So I had going into dentistry, I had a pretty good understanding of how biology works, and I think that's important. It's because the idea of just moving teeth around, and sometimes you have to in adults because the bite is so bad, but quite often with adults, particularly if they're overly crowded, you don't have much choice other than extracting teeth, and I'm sure you're aware of that, to fit the teeth the way they align. When it comes to discrepancies between the upper and the lower jaw, some people have that weak chin where the front teeth stick out. Well, usually it can be a jaw size discrepancy, but it can also be a jaw position discrepancy. So as an adult, it's very difficult to change either the size or the position unless you do it surgically. So with adults, that type of problem has to be managed surgically. But with children, I've had this occurrence on a number of occasions where you have an 8-year-old that was already planned to have jaw surgery at some future time, and there are orthopedic appliances this originated in Europe long before we clued into it here in North America, that you can actually modify the child's growth by putting these appliances in the mouth, and the bones will accommodate to this what they call functional matrix. So typically it may involve widening the upper arch somewhat to help accommodate the teeth as a first step. And then the second step would be to bring the lower jaw forward with these functional appliances while the child is growing. And quite often you don't have to do anything more. You can still accept misalignment of the teeth, but then you actually get a correction of the skeletal relationship. And that has to be done in the growing child. So that's where a big part of my practice was involved in.
Are you familiar with Dr. Stack from Washington?
The name doesn't ring a bell.
Oh, okay. Because he's one of the few in America that actually has worked with putting appliances. It's more popular, definitely, like you say, in Europe.
Yeah.
Even twin blocks, all kinds of things.
The twin block, yeah.
Yeah, that allows the mouth to expand, or the roof of the mouth, you know, to hold teeth. And takes into consideration the jaw, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to note that when I was doing my master's in craniofacial development in the orthodontic department at the University of Alberta, there were some orthodontic graduate students that were actually doing research on the same research that I was doing clinically, independently, and they actually beat me to publishing the paper on the results of the twin block appliance, is what they call twin block appliance. And it's basically confirmed what I had been doing for a number of years. So whereas I actually had received quite a few nasty letters from orthodontists when I was doing it back in the early 80s, you know, what am I doing messing around with children's growth and that sort of thing? Well, I was vindicated, you know, a few years later by this research. So, and now it's common practice to use these appliances to modify child's growth. It has become the standard of care. So before the only way they were treating upper to lower jaw discrepancies is by removing 2 teeth on the upper and sometimes even 2 teeth on the lower to do a dental correction rather than do a skeletal correction.
Right. I saw a 60-minute interview in England with I've forgotten his name right now, but a dentist who it was 2 twin boys, and one of them had the at the time common, you know, teeth extraction, and the other one used a combination of a physical, like manipulative therapy that allows, it was actually Bowen therapy that allows the jaw to align, and twin blocks that reinforced it.
Yeah.
And they at the end you can see as the boys developed. Yeah. One of them has a chin that goes all the way back, like they've lost the face, and the other one has all the structure, and they were identical before this, the different types of dental.
I'm surprised somebody actually did that study and allowed them to do that.
Well, I'll send you the link, because it's
I'm sure I've seen similar scenarios. Yeah, it's incredible. But yeah, so I've had a number of cases where it was determined that they would have to have jaw surgery, and we completely avoided it for a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the you know, potential, you know, problems that could result.
Wow.
It's been an exciting career. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So now you're enjoying learning and developing and creating art.
Yes. Marketing art is a challenge. I've being at the Marketers Cruise has been a real like wake up call. It's a whole new world I didn't know existed, and we're now both my wife and I are involved in a number of courses to understand the marketing funnels and social media marketing and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's the challenge is going to be to produce art, because I haven't been able to do much lately because we're doing all of this studying here. But I'm looking forward to that.
It can be a bit of a rabbit hole as well.
Yeah, right? It can be. Yeah. So it's we're not going to go too deep into that. But you need to know enough to be able to select the people to do the work for you.
Yeah,
so so I'm not going to hire. I've made the mistake of hiring people to do my website stuff in the past, and it ended up costing me nothing but money, and I got nothing in return. Right. So it's important to know enough to know how to choose the right people.
Yeah. So to delegate, you have to understand what you're delegating.
Otherwise, you're going blind and open to serious abuse. I'm excited now. My latest thing is I've developed a technique for monumental sculptures that are relatively light. It's called ferro cement. I didn't invent it. It was invented many years ago, but they use it for shipping, for building ships and other structures. And it involves using a metal mesh armature to
Right.
which you apply the cement. They built the houses and buildings in that way, and I'm looking at building monumental structures with ferro cement. So I built outdoor furniture like chairs and tables out of that, which is light enough to be able to move. When you think of concrete, you think of, it's there permanent, you need a crane. But I can make some really funky, interesting shapes, because the shape is no option with these, because you're not using a form, you're actually using the metal mesh as your final surface, and then you simply put the cement over top of that. And I've offered a course in this already 3 times, and we're setting up another one for Victoria coming
Wow.
up here in the next within the next couple of months anyway. Yeah.
Interesting. That's great. Well, if I can give you any suggestions for marketing, it's not my specialty by any means.
Yeah.
But I've gone through, like I said, I could always write the book about what not to do in business. But one thing that I think people underestimate is to take pictures and do videos as you're living the experience.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was at a master class on portraiture in Pietrasanta, Italy in 2018. And I met, her name is Melanie Batelier. She's an artist from New York, and she does design and art. She says, "Oh, Instagram, you have to learn Instagram." So she got me, introduced me to Instagram, and I got that going, and it's been running for almost 2 years now. I only have about 390 followers on that, but I've been posting on a regular basis, and I'm learning more as to how to increase that.
Yeah. But I think that's the, you're like, if you're passionate about what you're doing, people will come as well, as long as you're out there enough that that they can. I think that's great.
Yeah, I post videos on how I do things, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah,
you want to know how I do ferro cement, you have to check out my Instagram.
I will. Okay. So do you have any like closing final thoughts to share with everyone about your journey and recommendations to how to live your life as a healthcare based person? Because that's how you started. So
when it came to dentistry, I followed my passion. It was something that at some point, and it was in high school, that I decided, okay, I will do this, and you basically have to give it your all. That's at least certainly I did. I know there were classmates of mine that would be out fishing every weekend while I was studying, but that's they were obviously brighter than I was, because I had to do the work to get through. And art, I've always had that little spark of passion for art, and keep chipping away at it, keep at it, and someday you'll be surprised. Like, I was surprised with my first bust how lifelike it was, and I knew I had the hand-eye coordination, because I had learned that as part of my dental training. But like any skill can be mastered. So whether it's the skill of your profession, which that's something I always did. I made sure I dedicated a day a month for continuing education throughout my dental career, and then eventually I decided, because dentistry is a fairly physically demanding. Not that it's because of the repeated motion and the lack of movement that it is hard on your body. So I didn't have to give it up, but it was getting to the point where I felt, for my own health, to give up that aspect of it. But I still had enough knowledge and enthusiasm that I felt I could give back to society in that regard. So I taught for the full time for 7 years, and in that capacity, I was able to helped to contribute to improving the dental curriculum.
Mhm.
I was course coordinator for a number of years for diagnosis and treatment planning in dentistry, and that led to a teaching award that I got for that. That's a grassroots type of. It's called the W.W. Wood Award for Excellence in Dental Education. So I got that in 2017. So that sort of feels that I've my contribution was worth something. So that was good. So and then after that I figured there's more that I want to do, and part of that is I want to influence more people, how to get, I guess, more out of life. I feel I've extracted pretty much as I could out of life. I couldn't be happier. I'm beyond my wildest imagination.
Well, I guess two major passion projects, and then
yeah. So
personal life.
So it's good, but I've always believed that your reward in life is proportional to the people you serve, and in dentistry, I was able to serve more people in terms of society by actually helping to train dentists.
Yeah.
And students do acquire a bit of your philosophy if you have the right philosophy, and although I'm no longer teaching, I've written a book that's entitled Cavities No More. I think I mentioned it on the cruise, and I want to set up a foundation, nonprofit foundation to educate parents of children who are underprivileged, and make this information available to them. So that's sort of my last sort of big goal here.
Well, thank you. And also, when I'll get all these links to your page, and also your this foundation, all that, we'll put that on the website as well, so that people know.
That's in the incubator right now. It's the
No
book. The book is almost
Yeah.
finished, but
Okay.
all the rest of that is incubator stuff. So you can have an advanced warning on that.
Yeah, easy to update a page.
Yeah, you bet.
So thank you very much. For participating in this.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café with Dr. Manon. For more information, go to drmanonbolliger.com.